It's chapter 17, and today we're looking at friendships and how they end. Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. Ishiguro ends part 2 with one of the shortest chapters in the novel, but in it we find some of the most important conversations, or in Tommy and Kathy's case, lack thereof. Kathy does her best to pick up on her friendship with Tommy, but as she says on 198, "Of course I felt bad about it all, especially about Tommy's animals, but it wasn't as simple anymore as going to him and saying sorry and explaining how things really were. A few years earlier, even 6 months earlier, it might have worked out that way. Tommy and I would have talked it over and sorted it out, but somehow, by that second summer, things were different. Maybe it was because of this relationship with Lenny, I don't know. Anyway, talking to Tommy wasn't so easy anymore. So obviously, things are weird between Kathy and Tommy. They haven't even brought up the source of the weirdness. And while Kathy initially thinks her and Ruth are back to their normal ways, things are about to get much, much worse. Ruth and Kathy venture to a random bus stop overlooking a peaceful meadow. Here, Kathy brings up the conversation in the graveyard, but she doesn't accuse Ruth of betraying her trust or misrepresenting her to Tommy. Instead, she says, "I don't want to interfere, but sometimes, just lately, I think Tommy's been quite upset. You know, about certain things you've said or done." Now, Kathy tells us multiple times that she's trying to approach this tactfully, but it's still a pretty bold move to butt into someone's relationship like this. And if you look at her wording, she takes herself out of the conversation, out of the equation. But I think Tommy's upset not because of what Ruth did. Ruth was already doing that, and Tommy wasn't that upset, but because of what Kathy did, laughing at his artwork. I also suspect Ruth recognizes this, which is why, even though she initially responds pretty chill, like, "Okay, that's fine, thanks for letting me know, Kathy," she eventually comes back with this. "No, seriously, promise you won't get too cross, because I've got to tell you this. I wouldn't forgive myself if I kept quiet much longer." "Okay, what is it?" "Kathy, I've been thinking this for some time. You're no fool, and you can see that maybe me and Tommy, we might not be a couple forever. That's no tragedy. We were right for each other once. Whether we always will be, that's anyone's guess. And now there's all this talk about couples getting deferrals if they can prove, what they're really right. Okay, look, what I wanted to say, Kathy, is this. It'd be completely natural if you'd thought about, what would happen if me and Tommy decided we shouldn't be together anymore. We're not about to split, don't get me wrong, but I think it was completely normal if you at least wondered about it. Well, Kathy, what you have to realize is that Tommy doesn't see you like that. He really, really likes you. He thinks you're really great. But I know he doesn't see you, like a proper girlfriend. Besides," Ruth paused, then sighed. "Besides, you know how Tommy is. He can be fussy." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "You must know what I mean. Tommy doesn't like girls who've been with, well, with this person and that. It's just a thing he has. I'm sorry, Kathy, but it wouldn't be right not to have not told you." I thought about it, then said, "It's always good to know these things." I felt Ruth touch my arm. I knew you'd take it the right way. "What you've got to understand, though, is that he thinks the world of you. He really does." Now, in the movie, Ruth's delivery of these lines is quite dramatic. It's in the bedroom of the cottage, and Keira Knightley puts a sinister twist on the lines. By comparison, this scene in the novel is pretty tame. I have two theories about this. First, Kathy believes Ruth. Earlier in the chapter, Kathy wonders if things are different between her and Tommy because she's been with Lenny. And Ruth makes out Kathy's past relationships to be the central reason why Tommy would never be interested in her romantically. The second theory is that Kathy isn't actually mad yet. Compared to a movie, novels are quite the slow burn. And what really seems to upset Kathy is in the next couple paragraphs, when Ruth pretends yet again, or at least Kathy's convinced she's pretending, to forget the rule about the boundaries back at Hailsham. For to Kathy, this rule about Hailsham is the same as the essays. Earlier in the chapter, she tells us, "I had this idea at the time, and I was probably right, that if our sense of the essays being important was allowed to seep away, then so too would whatever bound us together as Hailsham students." To most of the former students, essays that aren't going to be graded and rules to places they'll never see again are pointless. But Kathy sees these things as their common ground, all that's holding the three of them together. But if all that's holding you together is the past, you're going to drift apart. And that's exactly what happens. At the end of the chapter, Kathy turns in her paperwork and leaves the Cottages to start her training early. She does all this without ever talking properly to Ruth or Tommy again at the Cottages. That's at the end of the chapter, but the beginning holds the prophetic commentary on Kathy's departure. She tells us, "It never occurred to me that our lives, until then so closely interwoven, could unravel and separate over a thing like that. If we'd understood that back then, who knows? Maybe we'd have kept a tighter hold of one another." I think that applies for any friendship. If you don't keep hold of it, it just ends. We'll pick up in part 3. See you then.